Friends, we are almost at the end of the calendar year, and I'm sure the new year is going to bring happy tidings to all of you. Let me wish you all a happy new year. We've been talking in the abstract so far. We've been talking about blunders that should be avoided. We've been talking about the etiquette, the manner of behavior, and so on. Today, I'll talk about real questions that have been asked at the interview and the replies that were given and the way those replies were probably assessed. I say probably because I don't really know as to what went right or what went wrong, because I only happen to know from the candidates or the officers about the marks that they secured. But I do not know whether this particular answer brought them very good marks or brought them poor marks. It is for you to judge. But let me tell you the real life instances. A candidate was asked about a matter which relates to a crisis of conscience. He was told, now let's imagine that you are the secretary of a department in a government, and you're faced with a situation by which you don't agree with the directive that has come to you from above with regard to a particular decision or a matter or a policy. You have tried your best to persuade the Chief Secretary, the concerned minister, to change the government's viewpoint, but it has been of no avail. What do you do in such a situation? To this was also added the point that you have sought an appointment with the Chief Minister and that has not yet been granted. Meanwhile, you have briefed the office of the Chief Minister about your views in the matter. In this situation, what is it that you as an officer would do? The answer given by the candidate was something on these lines. He said that in such a situation, he would probably resign from the service because he felt that he could not do something which was not in agreement with his principles or values. To the best of my understanding, I don't think this answer was appreciated by the board because they felt that this was an escapist policy and that the candidate should have been a little more imaginative about his answers. My suggestion in this situation would be something on these lines. There are a number of options available to an officer when faced with such a situation. And many a time in service, one does come across such situations, and it is not possible for an officer to resign when faced with such a problem. That would mean that probably most of the officers would be resigning halfway through their service. I would probably recommend that the candidate should have informed the UPSC that he would look at options such as A, gauge the reaction of the Minister, the Chief Secretary and the officers in the Chief Minister's office when he mentioned about his predicament. Based on that, he would have come to a conclusion that what he said was reasonable or not. B, there is something called general human ethics. If the views of the individual are in consonance with general human ethics and values, it is quite possible that he might face a small problem in the short term, but overall in the long term, his actions will be appreciated. And in any case, there is always the option to go back to the Chief Secretary and inform the Chief Secretary that one is not comfortable with the position and therefore would like to go on leave. You are all aware that in the judiciary, there are judges who recuse themselves from certain cases because they have certain valid reasons for that. Something on those lines would probably have been considered to be a more imaginative answer. Well, anyway, let me conclude by saying that with regard to this particular question and the reply that was given, the candidate's views were probably not appreciated and therefore he did lose marks. Let me come to the second question. This question relates to a candidate displaying alertness and presence of mind. The candidate was an engineer and he had, however, taken a liking for history, which was his optional subject in the civil services. An interviewing expert asked him a question about world history and more specifically about the Mesopotamian civilization. The candidate was able to explain the important features of the Mesopotamian civilization. And then came the second question as to why that civilization was called as the Mesopotamian civilization. To which the candidate replied that it is called as the Mesopotamian civilization because it was a civilization which flourished between the two rivers Euphrates and Tigris. And therefore, it was named as the Mesopotamian civilization, in the middle of two rivers. Third question was something totally unrelated to history, and it came from the interviewing expert without batting an eyelid, and he said, "Why do you think the hippopotamus got its name?" Now the candidate, I'm sure any candidate would have been flummoxed by such a question. But this candidate was superb in his reflexes. And pat came the answer. The Mesopotamian civilization is called as that because it was a civilization that flourished between two rivers, and Meso means middle, and therefore I would imagine that, and this is what the candidate said, I would imagine that Potamia relates to rivers. The word Potamus or Potamia is common between Mesopotamia and hippopotamus, and therefore the hippopotamus probably got its name from the fact that it lives in water or in the rivers, and that is why the hippopotamus is also considered to be a river horse. This was received with absolute exhilaration. And the candidate went on to score the highest marks in the interview that year. I am mentioning this as a real life instance to say that the performance at the interview, your presence of mind, your alertness can make a big difference to your performance in the examination as a whole, and thereby not only get you the service of your choice, but probably the state cadre of your choice. A third question which I would like to talk about today is about delivery of services. We all know that delivery of services in government is very important, and a candidate was asked a very simple question. He was told by the interviewing expert that we all know that in India the entire allocation of resources towards a scheme does not finally reach the beneficiary. And by the time the resources reach the beneficiaries, a part of it gets siphoned off. What does the candidate think about effective measures that can be taken to prevent such dilution or such draining away of resources? The candidate explained about the Santanam Committee of the 1960s, the formation of the Vigilance Commissions, the constitution of the Central Bureau of Investigation, the enactment of the Prevention of Corruption Act, and then went on to elaborate about the right to information legislation, the appointment of the Lokpal and the Lokayukta, and so on. But the marks secured by him at the interview showed that this answer had not been appreciated, for the simple reason that he did not apply himself to the question. The question was about measures that will be taken by you to prevent corruption, and the candidate explained about various measures that had been taken by the government to prevent corruption, and therein lay the problem. The candidate should have actually explained about, probably in short, about the efforts taken by the government, but should have applied himself more elaborately to measures that, in his opinion, will have to be taken to curb corruption. Well, I'll tell you what could have been said that remained unsaid that day, and therefore the candidate did fare well. But there are always these instances where there is a slip between the cup and the lip, and that's what makes the interview so special. So let's meet again next week. Thank you, friends. Bye. All the best.